I pass. Good evening. My name is Renard Sanders with the Claiborne Avenue History Project, and along with the New Orleans Jazz Museum, Greg Lambuzzi is out of town in Florida taking a long weekend. We'd like to welcome you to part 2 of Dr. Michael White Jazz and Democracy Workshops. I first saw one of Dr. White's workshops at Xavier University when he was officially employed, but now he's retired. And we had been talking over the years about doing this, and for us to get an opportunity to get inside of the musicians, really kind of let them tell their stories. And of course, Michael has a lot to tell. So for those of you all that were here last week, you can catch it on the Facebook page on the New Orleans Jazz Museum. And for those of you all that are here this week, you can catch it there too. But for those of you all that are right here, it's much better. So without any further ado, with these great musicians, my neighbors, my lifelong friends, Dr. Michael White and his band.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome to part 2 of our Jazz Democracy Workshop. How many of you here were here last week? Okay, yes. All of these people, they can tell you we gave them a test at the end and they all passed, so that's why they got to come back. So before you leave, you have to take a test. So that first song you heard was traditional New Orleans jazz, Shake It and Break It. It was an old dance hall song. We would like to, before we begin, thank our sponsors who made this presentation possible. In particular, we'd like to thank Dr. Reynard Sanders and Catherine Cecil of the Claiborne Avenue History Project. And also Greg Lambusi of the New Orleans Jazz Museum. I'd also like to introduce, at this time, the members of my quartet. On bass, we have Tyler Thompson. On banjo, Detroit Brooks. And on trumpet, Greg Stafford. Somebody asked, if I didn't go to part 1, can I go to part 2? Yes, we're going to recap a little bit. Last week in part 1 of the Jazz Democracy Workshop, we looked at our basic premise that in its original manifestation, New Orleans jazz is a metaphor for and a living example of American democracy. We saw that jazz was born during the racially turbulent post-Reconstruction 1890s, as African Americans were struggling for freedom and equality among a new wave of racial violence and legal limits on black rights, safety, and mobility. Musicians like the legendary cornet player Charles Buddy Bolden and others introduced a new musical sound and style that satisfied the city's traditional need for functional celebratory music. But it was also a covert way of addressing the social needs and condition of the city's diverse and vibrant black population. Primarily, jazz was dance music. And we're going to give you an example of a popular song entitled Fidgety Feet. Jazz was revolutionary in its blend of African and European musical elements as they converged in the black community. To understand the relationship between jazz and democracy, last week we looked at the musical makeup of New Orleans-style jazz bands, like the typical 6 or 7-piece groups, marching brass bands, or small combos like the quartet we have today. The roots of early jazz song types that make up New Orleans jazz were hymns, blues, marches, rags, and popular songs. We showed that each instrument of a jazz band has a specific role, inside of which there is freedom to express, interpret, and improvise inside of the rules or laws of music, with songs having distinct melodies, harmonic structures, and rhythms. As I mentioned, each instrument has a role. The bass plays along the structure of a song, plays the lower end spectrum notes, and also keeps time. The banjo also keeps time and plays along the chord or harmonic structure of a song. The trumpet plays the lead theme or the melody, and the clarinet plays around the melody and accompanies the trumpet in musical conversations or playing harmonies or rhythm. I'm going to give you an example now of a song that goes back to the earliest days of jazz that was reportedly played by Buddy Bolden. Here is Make Me a Pallet on Your Floor. Now, this was I should explain, because, I don't know if we can do that in here. I see a couple of people. But this was the kind of song they used to have to play at night after the polite church-going crowd went home. And because it would make you grab who's ever closest to you and pull them close and start dancing, and that would always start a fight and break up the dance. So we're gonna try this. I think we can get away with it. You all look safe, except for this lady right here. I don't know, but we're gonna see. There's a little bit of Make Me a Pallet on Your Floor.
Oh, now make me a pallet on the floor. All right. Oh, now make me a pallet on the floor. You can make it high and you can make it low, as long as you place it right at my door. Oh, make me a pallet that's on the floor. Oh, now make me a pallet on the floor.
right. Oh, now make me a pallet on the floor. Now make it right. Please tuck it tight. We be loving all through the night. Oh, make me a pallet on the floor.
Okay, I think we made it. I saw you holding her down. So we said that jazz functions like a democracy in that there is freedom of expression within musical rules. Jazz does not seek to destroy, omit, or overthrow the laws of music. The melody, harmonic structure, and rhythms remain, but are loosened, altered, or liberated to allow for personal interpretation and improvised free expression. Revising or amending the laws of the nation to allow for unrestricted individual collective expression and equality were exactly what Black people sought in their renewed struggle for freedom and equality in American society in the same decade that this music was born. As a part of the free expression concept, early New Orleans jazz emphasized development of individual sound and expression. I mentioned last week that the 36 second-generation musicians that I knew and played with who were born between the late 1890s and 1910 all emphasized the importance of creating a unique and highly personal sound and expression as a way of erasing societally imposed Black invisibility and worthlessness. Presenting one's own unique tone and musical personality in public was a way of self-liberation that earned things that were elusive in daily life, like recognition, respect, expression of emotions, demonstrating creative intelligence, and having a chance to compete and win. We looked at the complex march-type song, common in New Orleans jazz, as an ultimate example of jazz performance as democracy in action. Marches are a complex and complicated song form of European military band origins. They typically have introductions, several main sections, short interludes or transitions, breaks, and changes of keys, harmonic structure, volume, and mood. In the outer world, marches were played strictly as written from sheet music parts. That was also the case with brass bands playing marches here until the late 19th century, when Buddy Bolden's generation applied the new improvising jazz style to marches and other brass band songs. So we're going to give you an example of an old march right now entitled the Bugle Boy March. Those of you that may have played in high school or college marching bands might recall marches as being the most difficult song type that you had to deal with because it's a lot of parts, a lot of rules. So here, we're not trying to overthrow the rules. We're altering or amending the rules to allow for freedom. If you feel from your personal and cultural experience, if you feel a little blues, you could put a little blues phrasing in there. You could put a little Latin phrasing in there or whatever, okay? So we're showing an example of how democracy works within the march structure. Here is Bugle Boy March. you, thank you. So as we just heard, jazz and democracy are linked by the use of common foundational principles and related concepts, such as freedom of expression, equal participation, the right to assembly, and the allowance for diversity and possibility. Bugle Boy March, in that song, which I guarantee is a lot more fun than reading the music, Bugle Boy March, here we maintain the march structure and the basic musical laws, but we also improvised, allowing for freely expressed individual and collective ideas that could come from a wide variety of ethnic and personal experiences. While performing New Orleans jazz in a band context is a demonstration and symbol of democracy, the jazz-related democratic concept in New Orleans culture was not limited to jazz band performances. The New Orleans Second Line, with its main form being Black social club parades, is the largest and most significant demonstration of jazz-related democracy in action. Let me break down what I mean. Let us look at the original Second Line tradition of Black social club parades as it existed throughout most of the 20th century into the late 1970s and early 80s when brass bands changed. These large gatherings were a show of the democratic right to freely gather. These parades were a way of bonding, showing collective and individual expression and demonstrating unity and strength. Black social club parades had three main components. One, several divisions of the sponsoring social clubs, which were benevolent societies or social aid and pleasure clubs. The clubs would be dressed in matching outfits of bold colors that normally might be considered as clashing or visually challenging. I remember the first parade I played uptown in New Orleans when I was just starting out playing in brass bands, and the club had on 6 different colors of red, and none of them matched. But because they all wore them, they did match. The attitude with which they wore them made them match, and I learned a valuable lesson. The aggressive wearing of such vibrant colors, like the use of, also including the use of colored sashes, umbrellas, handkerchiefs, canes, and baskets, are influenced by traditional West African processions. We always think we invented everything. We didn't. The second part of traditional social club parades are one or more 10 to 12-piece brass bands. We're talking about traditional bands, which mainly wore standard band uniforms and later black suits with white band caps. Coats would be removed during hot summer months. The bands played improvised jazz versions of marches, up-tempo hymns, blues, rags, popular songs, and special jazz numbers as they casually walked along the parade route. A traditional military-like snare drum cadence kept time between songs. The brass band songs were made uniquely exciting by the use of syncopated African-derived rhythms, now known as the second line beat. A third part of the traditional Black social club parade was the second liners, the up to thousands of anonymous people who seemed to spring up from nowhere to dance excitedly and cheer as they followed alongside the club members and bands throughout the parade's 6-hour-plus duration. Today, parades have been regulated to 4 hours, but back in the day, 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours maybe. Second liners can be dressed anywhere they choose. The second line dance that they and the club members do is a free-form West African-inspired dance that can be as original and creative as the brass band jazz that accompanies it. In fact, the music of the brass bands and the second liners' dances mutually inspire each other. A large celebration of freedom. I remember times when it seemed as though the dancers next to me were the notes that jumped out of my horn and assumed wildly gyrating human form. I would look at them and like, or sometimes it seemed like the movements of dancers converted into notes and phrases that magically came singing through my clarinet. I guarantee you a lot of those times it was not me playing. I don't know what happened, but. We have a miniature version, and this is a surprise for everyone. We have a miniature version of the Liberty Brass Band to give us the flavor of a traditional social club parade. We have veterans of the New Orleans brass bands. We're going to play the traditional style for you. On snare drum, the leader of the Treme Brass Band, Mr. Benny Jones. On bass drum, Mr. Anthony Bennett. On tuba, Mr. John Gross. And on trombone, a member of the Paulin family, very important in the New Orleans second line tradition. His father was Ernest Doc Paulin, who started a lot of younger musicians, including myself, in playing this music for many, many years. He was born before 1910, and he was a legend in the streets, Doc Paulin. Here is Dwayne Paulin on trombone. So we're going to show you a song that's common in the second line parades with our miniature brass band. It is entitled Paul Barberin's Second Line. And if anyone wants to join in with us, feel free to do so. We're going to join the brass band. All right, how was that? Okay? So when we consider the components of a second line parade and what goes on, it becomes clear that these events are democracy in action. The blend of visual, social, and musical elements combine to create a temporary, euphoric world dominated by a sense of freedom and equality. The second line parallels American democratic ideals by showing how a wide range of diverse elements and people can coexist in harmony and freely express themselves. In the second line, the blending of the club's bold colors, an African influence, cultural influence, the conservative brass band attire, a European influence, and the casual attire of the second liners all make a visual statement about freedom and inclusiveness. In the second line, all people are accepted and free to express themselves verbally and through their own often unique creative dancing. Some people became street legends for the way they would dance the second line. You would see a wide variety of people, young and old, well-dressed and raggedy, beautiful and plain, fat and thin, nice-toothed, gold-toothed, and toothless, church-looking people and rough-looking people, famous and infamous people, every variation of brown skin imaginable, from the lightest light to the darkest dark. There would be crippled people, mentally challenged people, flamboyantly gay people, all free to be who they are and dress how they want to dress and dance how they want to dance. There was also everything in between those extremes, all enjoying and creating the democratic collage of visual, social, and sonic freedom and harmony, all under the guise of having fun, celebrating, and honoring special anniversaries or holidays. Church parades and jazz funerals were related offshoots of the social club parades with their own unique characteristics and meaning. We don't have time now to examine those practices in detail, but perhaps we can do a future program here where we can. Now we will do a couple of examples of typical brass band music and style that dominated community processions from the earliest days of jazz throughout most of the 20th century. First, we're going to start out with a funeral dirge. One of the most popular hymns in New Orleans and in jazz funerals is Just a Closer Walk with Thee. We do know that the jazz funeral is a time-honored tradition, a community event in which you honor a deceased person in two ways. One, by showing the sadness at the loss, indicated by slow, sad music. The other way of celebrating the good times of that person's life and acknowledging the fact that now that person is free of earthly troubles and burdens. They've moved on to a greater existence in union with the Creator. So that's a time for joy and celebration. So we're going to do, for that, Just a Closer Walk with Thee. And just to show you how those songs can go, we're going to do it first as a dirge, like we do when we're en route to the cemetery. And then after the burial or dismissal, or cutting the body loose, as we call it, we're going to do the same song in an up-tempo version. But this is the authentic brass band jazz funeral style. Just a Closer Walk with Thee. I mentioned the church parade. Every time I say this, somebody comes up to me after and says, church parade still exists. The type of church parade I'm talking about is now extinct. I was very fortunate to play in many church parades with brass bands. And those church parades were accompanied by a church congregation with several divisions. They were smaller and more tame versions of the second line parade. Church parades usually happen on Sunday mornings before the Saturday night people got up. So you had a smaller crowd, and the church parades only lasted at the most 2 hours, hour and a half, 2 hours. They paraded in the neighborhoods. They stayed in the neighborhoods of where the churches were. Church parades were usually given for a religious holiday, a pastor's anniversary, or some other kind of celebration of Sunday school, etc. And we played dozens and dozens of church parades back in the day. And a lot of people think that jazz and church wouldn't mix, but actually they mix very well. These were like another extension of the democratic ideal, but with a religious overtone. The music that we played was jazzed up versions of hymns. Now, the reverends would, every time, the reverends would go to the band leader and say, "Now, you playing for the Lord today. None of that jazz music." "Yes, Reverend." And we played the same jazz style that we played in the second lines, right, fellas? Right. And in the church parades, we always played up-tempo hymns, never slow hymns. Up-tempo hymns as the church sisters and brothers strutted gracefully along to the music, trying very hard not to break out into a wild second line. And those were very beautiful, dignified ceremonies that showed a certain kind of strength and power. It was another form of democracy, to see all these people in order and to listen to this beautiful music ringing through the community, through the neighborhoods, ringing through the alleyways and through the streets early in the morning. It was like a victory call. It was a beautiful extension of the New Orleans second line tradition. So we're going to give you one of the most popular songs in brass band tradition. I think this is the first song I ever played. It's called "Lord, Lord, Lord, You Sure Been Good to Me." Don't go anywhere, fellas. See, they want to sit down now, but in the second line, they'd be out there like 5 and 6 hours. But the spirit is so strong, you don't notice it. So I said one of the song types that was common, and we're going to play this a little bit longer, is the blues. And the blues can be played in any tempo or mood from a musician standpoint. So we're going to give you a song that has the common 12-bar blues structure that's very popular, one of the most popular songs in the social club parades. Oh, okay. I thought the spirit was coming. Here is the Whoopin' Blues. Okay, y'all can sit down now. They're looking at me. Liberty Brass Band. So, more than ever in modern times, the meaning, future, and existence of democracy in America is being questioned, reconsidered, threatened, and challenged as this nation finds itself in the midst of political turmoil, social discord, division, and an uncertain future. Perhaps America should look at the New Orleans jazz and second line traditions. Should look at the New Orleans jazz and second line traditions as a model for true democratic existence in which peace, harmony, equality, freedom, diversity, respect, individual rights, and collective unity are blended for the common good of all people. So, does anyone have any questions? I used to ask that to my students and nobody would say anything. I said, well, then I have questions. That's the way you get students to shut up. Say, you know, you ask them a question, they don't say a word. Yes?
Can you say again what was African about all of that?
Oh, okay. The African influence was transformed, but in the second line tradition, if you look at West African ceremonies, and you turn off the sound, they look a lot like the New Orleans second line. You see bold colors, bold use of colors. You see the use of umbrellas. And in West African tradition, umbrellas, dancing with colored umbrellas were a symbol of royalty or social status. We see handkerchief waving, which was the idea of waving cloth to purify the air. And we see other paraphernalia. The second line dance is influenced by West African dancing. And so this is a carryover and transformation. It's not exactly the same, but it's the African American experience with African cultural memory as it came through and was practiced in New Orleans. As you know, New Orleans had a long-standing tradition of authentic and transformed African music, as most notably known at Congo Square, where on Sundays in the early decades of the 19th century, enslaved people were allowed to gather on Sundays and dance much of the time to authentic African-style drumming. And that was a very important way of celebrating. And we think that the second line is a carryover from that. A lot of the West Africans form circles, but of course the second line is like it's a line, so it's like a movable version of that. And sometimes in the second lines, I have seen actually, unconsciously, I've seen social club members stop and form circles and dance in the circles. And I'm like, oh, that's West Africa. We don't even know, but that's what it is. So, yeah, that's some of the elements. And in New Orleans jazz in general, in the music itself, the way bent tones were used and the way the blues structure was used are influenced by West Africa. And one of the most popular instruments in New Orleans jazz, people associate this instrument with country music and hillbillies, but the banjo is of West African origin. So there are a lot of elements that were transformed in the process along the way. Anyone else? Yes. Well, that's a tough question. It's not that it's tough, it's that I really don't want to get into it. But I'll tell you, since you asked. I came along, Greg Stafford, Benny Jones, Dwayne Paulin. We came along at the time when the older brass band tradition, as it had been throughout most of the 20th century, from the beginnings of jazz and most of the 20th century, we came along at a time when that tradition was changing. It was evolving. It changed to modern brass bands like the Dirty Dozen and the Rebirth. And their style, repertoire, attire, demeanor, all of those things were very different from what went along with the church parade. So while traditional brass bands knew a lot of hymns, we play a lot of hymns all the time. Hymns are part of New Orleans jazz. We play hymns in almost every performance. Brass bands play a lot of hymns as well. But the modern brass bands were not versed, let's say, in the hymns, number one. Number two, a lot of the modern brass bands didn't wear the kinds of uniforms, let's say, that the church people wore. Church people had proper decorum, and they wore suits. The church sisters wore white dresses with something on their head, and it was a beautiful thing. The brass band musicians wore suits. Modern brass band musicians generally don't wear suits. I won't get into that too much. However, so that changed. Those things changed. And also, the available musicians that would have played in church parades started to kind of die out and become not available. Some of them were union members, and the costs became prohibitive. Some of those members started to do this new thing called the jazz brunch on Sunday in air-conditioned hotels and make a lot of money. But the church parades were really beautiful. I remember times when Greg and myself, we would give up an air-conditioned hotel job to play a church parade where we made, what, $10, right? 12? $7, yeah. But we got $100,000 in spiritual fulfillment. Someone else had a question? Oh, that's a good question. Were there ever Catholic church parades? I remember playing in, because most of them were Baptist churches, I remember playing in some anniversary parades. What was the name of that Catholic church along the railroad track? Saint Mary of the Angels? Yes. I remember doing a church parade for them with the Young Tuxedo Brass Band. But in general, there were Baptist churches. But a lot of the, a number of jazz musicians were Catholic, but not in general, they didn't do a lot of. Benny, did you do a lot of Catholic church parades? He did a few. Greg? Not much, yeah. Not too many. Most were Baptist churches. Yes? The Knights of Peter Claver? Did they have brass bands? Oh, yes, yes. Yeah, the Knights of Peter Claver, yes. No, they didn't. They didn't have the brass bands like this tradition that we're talking about. Yes. The name Liberty came about because I started the Liberty Brass Band back in 1984, believe it or not. And I selected that name for several reasons. One is because it went along with the idea of freedom that a lot of the other brass bands had names that seemed to imply something positive in a march toward freedom, perhaps, like Olympia, Eureka, Onward. They had names like that. So that was one reason. Another reason was because I was trying to free traditional jazz from some of the negative stereotypes associated with it. And another reason was because I was living on Liberty Street. But that was an important street because there were a lot of musicians in the tradition that were connected to that street. The barbershop where Buddy Bolden used to hang out was owned by some of my relatives. He lived on the corner of Liberty. The barbershop was on Liberty. Several other musicians War on Liberty. There was a cemetery where some of the musicians were buried farther up on Liberty. So it was an important street in the history of jazz that sort of connected. Liberty and Perdido was important in the early days of jazz. Black Storyville, you know, where jazz bands played. So the street had a significance, and I like the idea of freedom, which is, you know, the thing that stood out the most in the second lines, especially when you have such restrictive, you know, sometimes restrictive cultural elements around you. That was like total freedom. Someone else had a question. Yes.
What do you think about the proliferation of destination weddings, where people are just walking behind the band and don't know what's going on?
Wait a minute. Aren't you supposed to be in France? Oh, okay. Just returned from France, bringing New Orleans culture to France, Miss Giovanna Joseph of Opera Creole. So now I forgot the question. Oh, okay. Sometimes I play jobs, and I might be in a hotel or going to a job in the quarter, and I hear the destination wedding things. People in destination weddings just want a little, they want to dance, they want to be happy, they want a little noise. They don't care about tradition, they don't care about traditional repertoire or style or anything. So a lot of the destination weddings that I've seen, and increasingly so, look very little like real New Orleans second lines or have real New Orleans jazz. I've seen bands that have, they're playing nothing but pop music, and they sound like a small high school band. You know, I've seen bands that, you know, have just a couple of like 3 or 4 pieces or something like that, and it's a commercial thing. People want to make money, and you know, musicians don't care. They want to make money. So, you know, and people that have weddings. I mean, we all have played wedding parades before, but we usually do those with, you know, full brass bands. But I think a lot of times it's just the commercialization of this tradition. So, you know, sometimes it makes me a little mad, but I remember one time, I shouldn't say this. Do it. I saw a band playing for a wedding, and it was so bad. And the trumpet player passed by me, and he put his horn in my direction and started playing, and I gave him the evil eye. And before I knew it, he fell flat on the ground. And all I said was, don't mess with my tradition. But, you know. Okay. Anyone else have a question? Yes. Do I plan to publish? She said, now that I'm retired and have so much free time. I don't know where you got that idea from. I am busier now than ever before. A lot of people don't know, I've been writing for many years about New Orleans jazz. I've published more than 60 pieces, essays, articles, book chapters, encyclopedia entries, CD liner notes, stuff like that. But I am working on, I have completed and trying to get published a memoir recently where I talk about this music. Thank you. And I'm hoping that's the beginning of, you know, doing more extensive pieces, because I've developed a pretty unique perspective on the tradition by being out there with the authentic music and also being with these dozens of older musicians. I had interviewed all of them, gathered a lot of notes. So yeah, there'll hopefully will be some stuff coming. One more, yes.
So what steps might be taken to bring democracy to New Orleans through jazz?
That is a good question. What steps might be taken to bring democracy to New Orleans through jazz? Having conscious people stage programs in a large context using the right musicians and making the right points. because unfortunately, and you know, a lot of times, again, in a larger context, people are just happy to be in New Orleans, and they don't know, and you know, they don't know what it is and what it's supposed to be. They just whatever they accept, whatever people give them. But the real tradition and the significance of the tradition is often lost. It's not taught in schools. A lot of the bands are not really adhering to tradition. So, you know, we need to make a bold statement in a larger public forum. But of course, you know, that has to do with government, that has to do with education, and a lot of times in those forums, they hire people they like, or they hire people who are cheap. They don't care about tradition and history and significance. Dr. Raynard Sanders.
So school is not bad on a Friday night for you all. Someone asked, you know, what's this is going to be like? And I said, well, you just have to wait and see. But for the last 2 weeks, last Thursday and this Friday, Michael has really come and tried to change the narrative and tried to create a new narrative about this music that we take for granted. So I want to thank everyone for coming. We do have a sign-on list at the front. If you put your name and email, we'll email it to you. We got also some bumper stickers, and also, you know, you got to follow directions here. When you get up there, please say, if you like this workshop, please post it to our Facebook page. Your responses mean a lot. And you can't say enough about Dr. Michael White and his band. Tyler Scholar, Detroit Brook, Greg Stafford, Benny Jones, John Gross, the band director, Mr. Paulin, Mr. Bennett, and also the incomparable Benny Jones from the Treme Brass Band. Now, I have to end it. You can't talk after Michael plays his last number, so that's why I came up early, but I think he's going to play one. Am I correct? That's right. Okay, well, see, I follow directions.